Right now, if you get too hot, the problem lasts about 4 seconds. You step into shade, you turn a dial, you drink something cold that was sitting in a machine, keeping itself cold for you all day, waiting. Now, take all of that away. It's midday on open African grassland. The ground temperature is high enough to blister skin. There is no shade for 2 kilometers in any direction. The nearest water you know about is a day's walk away, and you're not certain it's still there. Because the last time anyone checked was 3 weeks ago, and the dry season has been getting worse every year of your life. This wasn't a disaster scenario for your ancestors. This was Tuesday. And the strange part, the part almost nobody talks about, is that they didn't just barely survive those conditions. They were built for them, better than almost anything else walking. Let's start with your body, because it's the most underrated piece of survival equipment in the animal kingdom. You have somewhere between 2 and 5 million eccrine sweat glands spread across your skin. No other large mammal comes close. A dog has a handful, mostly in its paws. A horse sweats, but nothing like you do. Most mammals shed heat by panting, which works, but panting competes with breathing. You can't pant hard and run hard at the same time for very long. You can. A human in reasonable condition can lose 1 to 2 liters of sweat per hour. Trained people, in extreme heat, can push past 3. That's an evaporative cooling system running at a scale nothing else on the savannah can match. But sweat only works if it can evaporate. Which is why the second piece matters. You lost your fur. Nina Jablonski, at Penn State, has spent her career studying how human skin evolved, and her work points to something counterintuitive. Losing body hair wasn't a side effect of moving to a warm climate. It was the whole point. Bare skin, with millions of sweat glands underneath, is an active cooling surface. Fur traps the moisture and kills the effect. The trade-off was that naked skin under equatorial sun burns and the underlying tissue takes DNA damage, which is why dark, melanin-rich skin evolved alongside hair loss. The two changes are inseparable. One made the other survivable. And then there's the third piece, which is how you stand. Peter Wheeler, at Liverpool John Moores University, built physical models to test how much solar radiation a body absorbs in different postures. What he found is that at midday, when the sun is directly overhead, standing upright cuts the amount of exposed surface area dramatically, somewhere in the range of 60% less direct radiation compared to a 4-legged animal of similar size. A quadruped at noon is presenting its entire back to the sun. You're presenting your scalp, and your shoulders, and your head, sitting higher off the ground, is in slightly cooler moving air, rather than the superheated layer sitting on the sand. Bare skin, sweat glands, upright posture. Put those three together, and you get something that sounds absurd, until you check it against the evidence. Midday was not the dangerous time for early humans. Midday was their shift. Think about who else is out at noon, on the savannah. Nobody. Lions are collapsed in whatever shade they found. Hyenas are underground. Leopards are draped over branches, motionless. Every large predator that would happily kill you is functionally offline during the hottest hours of the day, because their cooling systems can't handle sustained activity in that heat. Yours can. Daniel Lieberman, at Harvard, working on human endurance and thermoregulation, has argued that this window is one of the most important things about us. The hottest, most exposed, most apparently lethal part of the day was the safest time for a human to be moving, hunting, gathering, and crossing open ground. Not because heat is pleasant, but because heat was the one competitive advantage humans had that nothing else could match. Your ancestors didn't hide from the heat. They used it as a shield. But heat is the easy problem. Heat you can out-engineer with a body. Drought is different. Drought doesn't care how efficiently you sweat. Sweating in a drought is actually the fastest way to kill yourself, because every liter you lose has to come back from somewhere. And if there's nowhere for it to come from, you have about 3 days. And Africa, during the period when modern humans were emerging, was not experiencing normal dry seasons. Sediment cores, drilled from the bottom of Lake Malawi, analyzed by teams including Andrew Cohen at the University of Arizona and Christopher Scholes at Syracuse, preserved a climate record going back hundreds of thousands of years. What that record shows, for the period between roughly 135,000 and 75,000 years ago, is a series of megadroughts, unlike anything in recorded human history. Lake Malawi is one of the deepest lakes on Earth. During the worst of those events, it dropped to a small fraction of its current volume. Not a bad year, not a bad decade. Arid conditions, sustained across timescales that would erase any modern civilization built around a river. Humans lived through that, and they did it with 3 things that had nothing to do with biology. The first was containers. At Diepkloof Rock Shelter in South Africa, Pierre-Jean Texier and his colleagues excavated hundreds of fragments of ostrich eggshell, roughly 60,000 years old, deliberately worked into flasks, a hole bored at one end, the surface covered in engraved geometric patterns. An ostrich egg holds about a liter. Sealed with a plug of grass or beeswax, it's a durable, portable, lightweight water bottle. That sounds small. It isn't. A water container is the difference between a landscape you can cross and a landscape you can't. Every source of water you know about becomes a node you can travel between instead of a place you're chained to. Water storage doesn't just prevent thirst, it expands the map. The second was knowing where water hides. Groups in the Kalahari, documented in detail by Richard Lee and other researchers working with the Droughts through the 1960s and 70s, could extract drinkable water from what looks, to an outsider, like completely dry sand. You find the right depression, a place where subsurface moisture collects, dig down, insert a hollow reed, wrapped at the base with grass to filter sediment, and draw water up by suction. A sip well. It's slow. It produces water almost drop by drop. And it works in terrain where a person without that knowledge would die of thirst, standing directly on top of the water they needed. They also rid water out of plants, water-storing tubers, buried a meter down, tsama melons that hold moisture through months of drought. Roots that can be scraped and squeezed. In the driest conditions, a significant share of a group's water intake came from things that were never liquid to begin with. None of that is instinct. All of it is knowledge, accumulated across generations, tested against real failures, and taught deliberately to children who would need it decades later. And the third thing is the one that actually mattered most: other people. Polly Weissner, studying the Droughts over many years, documented a practice called hexero, a system of long-term gift exchange between individuals in different groups. You'd have partners, sometimes dozens of them, spread across an enormous area. You'd give them something. Months or years later, they'd give you something back. On the surface, it looks like an elaborate social custom about beads and tools. It isn't. It's insurance. Because when your water hole fails and your territory goes dry, the thing that saves you is having the standing right to walk 100 kilometers into someone else's land and be received. Not tolerated, received, fed, given access to water that belongs to them. And that right doesn't exist unless it was built, deliberately, over years during the good times, by people who understood that the good times don't hold. Drought didn't select for the strongest groups. It selected for the most connected ones, the ones who had spent years maintaining relationships with people they didn't need yet. That's the actual survival technology, not the spear, not the eggshell flask. The obligation network, stretched across a landscape, waiting to be called on. Here's what I keep coming back to. We tend to picture our ancestors as people who endured the environment, hunched, suffering, holding on, until conditions improved. That's not what the evidence shows. In the heat, they weren't enduring anything. They were the best adapted large animal out there, walking around at noon, while everything that could kill them lay in the shade, waiting for evening. And in the drought, when the body's advantages ran out completely, they didn't solve it with toughness either. They solved it with memory, with objects they made on purpose, and with relationships they'd been maintaining for 20 years against a disaster that hadn't happened yet. You still have all of the hardware. You sweat better than any other mammal on this planet. Your posture still throws off the midday sun. You're carrying an anti-heat system that was fully optimized before anyone thought of a wall. What you probably don't have anymore is the other part, the map of where water hides, the names of 100 people in distant places who owe you nothing and would take you in anyway. Your ancestors would have found the first loss survivable. I'm not sure they'd have said the same about the second. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.